Welcome to the KuppingerCole Analyst Chat. I'm your host. My name is Matthias. I'm lead advisor and senior analyst with KuppingerCole Analysts. My guest today is Paul Fischer. He is senior analyst with KuppingerCole as well. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Matthias. Good to be back.
Great to have you again. And this is again for a very good reason. You've just completed a leadership compass, so a document comparing different vendors and products and services around the topic of data governance platforms.
Actually, just to correct you slightly, Matthias, it's a market compass, not a leadership compass. But
that's a good point. So maybe we start with the comparison of both. What is the difference?
Well, yeah, we should maybe tell people what the difference is. Well, the leadership compass is a much longer and more comprehensive report where we take a market sector or a product sector, and we rate sometimes up to 20 vendors in that sector. But the real difference between the leadership compass and the market compass is the leadership compass also has a lot of scientific ratings applied, so that we then get our leadership ratings and followers and challengers in the ratings charts. Whereas the market compass is, well, I wouldn't say it's subjective as so much, but we look at the market, the trends in the market, and then we look at each individual vendor and give them a write-up on their technology, and then we give them strengths and weaknesses, but also a spider chart on how well they address some capabilities. So, I mean, that's also in the leadership compass, but the real difference between the leadership compass and the market compass are the big ratings that we do in the leadership compass. So if you're even more confused than you were before about the difference, then maybe just have a look on our website at some of the leadership compasses and market compasses, and you'll see the difference. But data governance is definitely a market compass.
Right. So it's more for the quicker reader who wants to get a comprehensive overview over the market without drilling too much deep into the individual strengths and weaknesses of each product based on these comprehensive ratings, as you said. So it's also to learn something from that.
Yeah, and we also, with the leadership compass, we'll send the vendors a very long questionnaire, which forms the basis of our data analysis. So that's how we base the scorings on, for example, their financial strength and their innovation or market leadership and all those things. But yeah, the market compass is kind of like, I guess, a quick guide to the market. So if you're in the market for data governance platforms, then you'd get a good overview of what's available. Which, well, we hope that people do. Yeah. So.
Right. That's the point. So if we go back to the actual market segment that we're looking at and where people can learn from the market compass that you've written, what is this market segment? What should I think of when I think of data governance platforms? What are they useful for?
Yeah, well, data governance sounds very scientific and technical, but actually it's really about keeping control of data. We have two types of data in most organizations, structured and unstructured. So structured data is kind of what you would find in a traditional database, or even in things like Excel files. So the data is organized and it is attributed, and it's easy to find where it is and what it is in the data that you want. The growth of unstructured data has really happened in the last, well, probably since the internet sort of occurred. And unstructured data is data that sits in Word files. It might sit in email. It might sit in messaging chat. And it's basically any kind of data that just floats around the organization. And quite often those organizations are not aware of this data. They're certainly not aware where it is, and they're not really aware of what it could do for the business. So that's the difference between structured and unstructured data. So a data governance platform basically is there to make sense of all this, because to do this kind of thing manually, if you were to try and find all the unstructured data across your organization, that would probably be impossible and would take for ages. So a data governance platform can find, well, some of them will work with both types of data, unstructured and structured. But some will work purely with unstructured data, and then they can discover where the data sits across your enterprise. And don't forget also these days, your enterprise is not just the traditional infrastructure that we would consider to be the sort of the organization's HQ. Your enterprise now extends right out to people on endpoints. It extends to your vendors, increasingly extends to customers. So all of those people are creating data on a daily basis. And one of the things that we discovered when we were doing the data governance market compass was there's two sort of main drivers for data governance. One is in the clue is in the word governance. The danger is that some of this unstructured data will contain confidential information, or it might contain personal identifiable information. So you might have people's addresses, you might have their date of birth, you might even have government numbers such as their hospital number or social security number. And that might be sitting, someone may have pasted that information from a structured file and pasted it into a Word document or even into an email and then sent it to someone else. So suddenly that data is at risk. So because of things like GDPR and all the other privacy legislations which are now popping up all over the world, plus the security legislation that always exists, if this unstructured data is lost, then the company would be liable probably to fines and loss of reputation and all the stuff that goes with that. So that's one side of it. That's kind of like the negative positive. But the positive is that data governance could also add value. So the better the data governance platform is, the more likely it can find information and data, but then use analytics to add value to that data. So you might find, for example, you have, I don't know, like a cluster of emails from angry customers in, let's say, Stuttgart, just for example, which you wouldn't know that there is a problem in Stuttgart if you hadn't collated all that information. So these people might be sending emails, they might be sending angry statements on your social media channels as well. So by collecting that data, you can then analyze it and think, oh, well, there is a problem here. Why have all these people in Stuttgart decided to complain about our services? And then you can take it from there. So that's just one example. So, but it also would then help. The positive of that side would be if it was a product fault or a service fault, then you can do something about it and improve the product. So data governance is about traditional governance, risk and compliance, but it's increasingly about a business value as well. That's a very long answer to your question there, wasn't it? So.
Absolutely fine, because it really explains the whole story, the whole journey of what such a data access or data governance platform can achieve. So it's discovery, it's understanding what this data is, it's maybe tagging it, it's rating it, it's adding risk to it, understanding how it should be dealt with, if it's critical, if it's regulated, or if it's just something that can be ignored. And finally, then, as you said, use it also for additional purposes, for evaluation, for analytics. Is this I understand that many organizations are in the situation that they have to understand which data is flying around the organization and to get a grip on it. How is the market as of now? Is it a mature market? Is it the usual suspects, say, I don't know, IBM, Oracle, or is it a market for startups, or both?
Well, actually, I wouldn't say it's a mature market. It may have been. It could be one of those markets that sort of was mature until the explosion in unstructured data. So it was fairly mature in structured data because that didn't really, we had databases, Oracle, etc., that hadn't really changed for sort of 30 years or so. But what's happening, and I discovered, is that we do have the likes of IBM, Micro Focus, SAP, Varonis, etc., who you might say are the sort of more established players. But recently we've seen a company, for example, like Big ID, who I don't think even existed probably 5 years ago, but they've come into the market. They've got this incredible valuation. I think something $1 billion valuation. There's also smaller companies like OneTouch.io, Lepid, Ignite, etc. And I think the reason why the Big ID valuation is so high is because they're adding some elements of AI into the analytics and the search function. So they're adding that extra level of meaning to the data. Plus, I just think that I think it comes back to the business value thing, that businesses are realizing that data is their sort of lifeblood. And within the data that's flowing around their business could possibly be the answer to market problems or innovation or flattening some bottlenecks within the organization itself. So, for example, a process might generate a lot of internal complaints and you might not know about that normally, and so on. So it's definitely a area which I think is attracting a lot of interest from some of the bigger players as well now. Some of the bigger IT players, so the likes of Microsoft, etc., are thinking more about data governance. So yeah, it's kind of, as I said, it was mature. Now it's kind of not as mature because of this change in focus. But we also have a number of vendors to watch. I would name some names like Blue Tab, Everteam, Oval Edge, and so on, and even a company not normally associated with access governance, and that is SailPoint. SailPoint are, as you know, is traditionally a identity and access management vendor, but they have a product within their portfolio called File Access Manager, which is in itself it's very cut down, but it is a form of access governance or data access governance, and that is perhaps a sign of maybe some future developments, that access governance will be combined with access management as well. So you might be able to see clusters of data access going on within the organization and outside it, and you could see trends before they happen.
Right. And if I think of we've mentioned that quite frequently in this series of podcasts, if I think of our identity fabrics concept, their data governance is one of the identity related systems or services. So this is something where I think this plays very well together, what you said. So having traditional access management, access governance towards usually structured data or resources or access to systems, and extending that towards unstructured data, towards SharePoint, I don't know, wherever data is actually stored. That makes perfect sense when you want to have a bigger picture of all the types of data that are in your organization. And I think then these players make perfect sense here as well, right?
Well, exactly. One of the things that we rated the the various packages were in our spider. I mentioned at the start that we have a spider chart for each vendor where we rate them on a score for how well they meet capabilities. And in this one, we judged them on how well they could find data in Office applications, how well in chat and messaging, social media, PII discovery, report, and how good they were at automation and AI. Report generation, that's something I forgot to mention. Report generation is hugely important. I mean, not only knowing where your data is, but also a report to tell you, and then to tell you what you could do with it. And then we also rated them on compliance support and integration with cloud applications. So the social media and chat and messaging right now, not many of the vendors supported that, but some of the smaller and more innovative ones are certainly supporting that because they realize, with this, with the growth of things like Teams throughout the world, that there's data being generated there, and if your data governance platform can't see that, you may well be missing out on that as well. Especially as, I guess, we talk about customer identity, access, and management. And that's one way that customers are being allowed into organizations through access through things like Teams. So the more you start looking at this area, the more kind of exciting it becomes, because you realize it's sort of at the heart of digital transformation, and the way that we're using data or not using data perhaps is a better way of describing it.
Right, so these data governance platforms are somehow a kind of answer of how to deal with these new platforms that we're dealing with when we're talking about the cloud, talking about communication platforms like Office 365 or others, and also the communication via social media and via these modern communication platforms like Teams, like Slack, whatever. So they are really extending the reach of traditional governance towards that area. Did I get that right? And they use AI, of course, to use that buzzword at least once.
Yeah, they're using AI. I mean, it's machine learning, perhaps more than AI, but it's still a way of automating processes and seeing patterns that you might not see yourself. One thing that is important is that whilst some of these you could in theory use one of these platforms and get going straight away, but we at Kuppinger would recommend that you have a data governance blueprint in place, or an architecture, so you actually design how you want data governance to work, and then get the platform to do that. But as I said, you could still use some of these and deploy them, and they would start finding the data. But then you need some kind of framework, so you know who's responsible for data, what you're going to do with that data when it is discovered, who's in charge of an action plan to perhaps do the reporting and so on. You might need a data privacy officer. You might need someone to manage the whole thing. They don't have to be a data privacy officer. They could be just data governance officer, and that would probably differ between different types of organizations. So smaller ones would probably just have maybe one or two people in charge of this. Large organizations would have huge teams in charge of data governance, and it also depends on your business. If you're in finance or health, obviously the stakes are higher about data breaches and data losses, because you're dealing with much more sensitive and important information. So yeah, we. I don't think I mentioned the business glossary as well. Some of these tools can integrate with a business glossary, which would be unique to each business. So you could have your policies and business policies in there, and then you could map data to the business glossary so that this data is affects what we do in auditing. This data affects what we do in financial controls. This data affects our employees and so on. I mean, a business glossary is another whole area of sort of business science. But if your data governance platform can integrate with that, then it makes it even more efficient.
Perfect. So this market compass then could be used for those who are interested after hearing this episode of the podcast to learn more about the market segment as a whole and the individual product that you considered as relevant for this market compass. But when it comes to integrating that into an existing enterprise infrastructure, be it identity and access management, as we've mentioned, or in an overall data science, data management platform and data governance as part of that, that could also be, or that can be two ways of extending the reach of such a platform and getting to a more comprehensive overall data management that includes governance, but goes beyond that. So the document, as I understand, is already available. It's online right now, right?
Yeah, it's been online for about a month. So obviously, if you have a KuppingerCole license, you can download it straight away. If you don't, you can get, I think, a 30-day free trial, which gives you access to all our research. Yeah, it's called. Well, it's just called Market Compass Data Governance Platform. So if you search for that, you'll find it.
Yeah, that's perfect, and I would highly recommend it because I've read it before we actually recorded it. Although I had the name or the title, the document type wrong. Nevertheless, it's really a great work of research. So thank you, Paul, for doing that and for giving that great insight. And I think you've mentioned that maybe as a final thought, getting to such a blueprint for integrating that into an overall architecture, that is something that should be aimed at very soon once you know the market, once you know what functionality and capabilities are there. And that, of course, is something, at least one short commercial break here, to say, okay, this is something that where we as advisors can support in getting to a bigger picture that integrates more than just one platform, but getting to the right processes, the right blueprint for achieving that. Any final ideas from your side? What was striking when creating that?
Well, no. The thing that struck me most was how interesting the whole area was, it's not particularly with companies like Big ID that have taken this sort of dry and dusty area of data governance and turned it into something which is actually driven by a very easy to use dashboard and can find insights. And it's not just, as I said right at the beginning, it's not just about avoiding fines and GDPR, etc. It's actually a business tool that can make your business better, and it can make it run better, and it can, potentially help you to innovate new products. You can understand your customers better. You can understand your employees better, and of course your partners. Also, it's a way of just simply managing the we all create data every single day just by writing emails and responding to chat, etc. And then creating Word documents which we save on our laptops or PCs, or to give them the technical term, our endpoints. And it's a way of managing that so that we can certainly sift the wheat from the chaff, so we find the nuggets of gold in there and don't have to worry about the rest. But to be existing in a kind of blind state where all this is happening, and you know that unstructured data is all around you, but you haven't got a clue where it is or what it means. So that was the most interesting thing for me, was like, this is actually sort of data in action. This is, that cliche, data is an oil. Quite often people say that, but it's not often that you get to see that this is actually true. And so when we at Kuppinger talk about our identity fabrics and basing, identity around organizations, it's also identity and data, matching the two. So identities get access to the right data that they need, and they know where to find it, and so on. And the same, that those identities are creating data that we keep, we can manage that and organize it better. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing hopefully a leadership compass on this. There should also be in the pipeline more about creating a blueprint, a data governance blueprint, from us as well. Not sure if we're doing anything at our big conference in September, but perhaps we are. But it's an area that we're definitely going to do more in.
Perfect. So that's really fascinating to hear that, because, as you said, we often talk about technologies, but you really pointed out the actual use of it and the where it really makes sense within an organization, and that is obviously the case for these data governance platforms. So thank you again, Paul, for being my guest today, for giving that really fascinating insight into these platforms. The document is highly recommended. And as you said, there is more to come, so watch the space for more in this area. Any final words from your side?
No, I just, as I say, recommend take a read. It's not a huge document. As I said, it's a market compass, so it's a fairly digestible read. And then investigate some of these vendors. And like you said, we're also on hand to help people if they need advisory on any of this stuff. Just give us a call.
Great. Thanks again, and looking forward to talking with you about this topic and other topics very soon. Again, thank you again, Paul. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matthias. Bye now.
Bye.